today and every day. Let us unite around our common humanity and speak as one for equality, respect, justice, and dignity for all. Thank you. Let us recall that the inherent dignity and equal rights of all members of the human family provide the foundation for freedom, justice, and peace. And this includes respect for freedom of religion and expression, freedom from discrimination of any kind, and the right to participate in and preserve the cultural life of our communities.
As impressive as these words of the Secretary General of the UN sound, the reality is unfortunately different in many countries. That the inherent dignity and equal rights of all members of the human family are the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace. And this includes respect for freedom of religion and expression. End quote. At least in Finland, the prosecution and the court seem to have different views on this. In the case of Finnish politician Päivi Räsänen, who quoted the Bible on Twitter a few years ago and was put on trial for it. She was acquitted in March, but the prosecution appealed. After I was completely exonerated in court, I'm dismayed that the prosecution does not want to drop this campaign against me, said Päivi Räsänen. It seems this is indeed more than just a common court case. It seems that there is indeed a campaign, an organized campaign against the Bible and Christianity. We will also talk about this today with Päivi Räsänen's lawyer from ADF International, Coleman. The Bible remains under indictment, now here on EWTN TV UN-BLOG. I'm now connected with Paul Coleman in Vienna. Greetings to you, Paul. You have heard the words of UN Secretary General Guterres, who said that the inherent dignity and equal rights of all members of the human family are the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace. And this includes respect for freedom of religion and expression. Did the United Nations actually get involved in this case, where obviously these principles mentioned by Guterres were not applied? In the case against Päivi Räsänen and Bishop Johanna, the court had dropped all charges in March. I had already given the reasons in the first part of our interview. But again, for our viewers, what was the explanation of the Helsinki District Court to drop all charges? So at first a happy ending, a success, but that was severely clouded after the verdict was announced. You were on the spot at the hearings in the courtroom in Helsinki. Describe to us the atmosphere. Was there bias, support? How did that present itself to you? Although the court came to a well-justified, well-reasoned acquittal, the prosecution did not let up. The witch hunt continues. Obviously, there's a targeted agenda at play here, isn't there? Paul, there is an imminent danger, in my opinion, that even the proclamation of the Word of God from the Bible in churches could be labeled, even prosecuted, as hate speech by our predominantly secular societies in the future. What can we do about it? The International Lutheran Council had already published this statement in June 2019. I quote, "The vast majority of Christians in the world, including Catholics and Orthodox, share Räsänen's convictions. Does the Finnish prosecutor's office want to condemn all of us? Or worse, should the Finnish state now risk sanctions by other states for disregarding basic human rights?" I think as Christians we are called to fight for what we believe in, peacefully and without weapons, be it abortion or freedom of religion and expression, and we have to keep up with it. A German saying, "Constant drop hollows the stone," as the recent reversal overturning of the 1973 Roe v. Wade abortion decision by the US Supreme Court confirmed. The famous English Roman Catholic writer Gilbert Keith Chesterton, known as G.K. Chesterton, wrote, "There are people who hate Christianity and call their hatred all-embracing love for all religions."